Hello and a very warm welcome. My name's David Roth from WPP, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to Follow the Sun, 24 hours of broadcasting right across the world to celebrate the launch of the WPP BAV Best Country Study for 2021, done in conjunction with US News and the Wharton Business School. It's a pleasure to have you join us for this section. Of course, this broadcast is going to be right across the world. We're starting in Australia and New Zealand, and we'll be ending at the end of the 24-hour period in the USA. Well, we've got an absolutely packed broadcast today, and I'd like to start off by introducing Mike Sussman from BAV. Mike has been the brainchild behind the Best Country Studies for many years, and there's nobody better to put the Best Country Study into context. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, David. We're really excited about the launch of the 2021 Best Countries study. It's the most comprehensive study of the power of nation brands. We've been doing this for 6 years, covering countries that represent 95% of the global GDP and about 75% of the world's population. So an amazing coverage. This year, we're looking at 78 countries. We spoke to over 17,000 business decision makers, citizens, and elites around the world. And we've ranked countries on a battery of metrics, including 26 key rankings that we'll talk about throughout this report and throughout the app. One thing we've seen over time is the shifting impact of soft power. It's becoming more and more important to driving the power of a country, while hard power, like banks and tanks, as we call it, the more traditional power, is becoming less impactful on the success of a nation. When we think about the power of a nation, we think about 10 key dimensions, and you can look at each of these ranks and how a country does on these things, from entrepreneurship to cultural influence to quality of life. We've introduced 2 new ones that are becoming more and more important today in these changing dynamics of culture. One of those is how purposeful, how socially purposeful is a nation. And the second is how agile is a nation, how responsive it is to things, particularly during a COVID era. And both of those dimensions are extremely important in driving the GDP and the success of a nation. Agile nations are seen as 3 times more likely to be a better job market. They're rated 3.2 times more likely as being economically influential. They are more connected to the rest of the world. So agile nations are doing something to resonate with people globally. Really important to mention, and it's the biggest driver now of GDP. And that's something that the nations need to be more and more of today. So when you think about agility, the top nations around the world this year are USA, number 1 in terms of being an agile country, followed by Australia, and in 3rd place is Canada. We continue to see the rising power of purpose, not just for brands, but also for nations. In fact, purposeful nations are 57% more likely to be considered for tourism, 55% more likely to be considered as a place to do business. So it's important to be seen as a purposeful and socially responsible country. Number 1 on this purposeful dimension is Canada, followed by Denmark, and 3rd place is New Zealand out of 78. So pretty impressive, pretty strong dimensions, very important. We also see the power and impact of brands that resonate from countries. In fact, 79.5% of citizens say that consumer brands play an important role in defining a country's culture. So there's a strong relationship between the brands and the nation. We also see that 78.6% of citizens say that the country a product is made in impacts their preference for a brand. So you can see that interplay between brand and country and how important it is today. And we started measuring the power of what does it mean to be made in a specific country. What does made in America mean, or made in China? And we can rank the power of these nations in terms of their exports. So, for instance, Germany ranks number 1 in terms of the country you'd want to buy an automobile from. They also dominate on pharmaceuticals and beer. So you can see a little bit of a balanced power of that nation. Italy is number 1 on fashion. So that's the top brand for when you're thinking about buying fashion brands. France owns cosmetics. In terms of the best countries for real estate, Canada ranks number 1, followed by the United States and then France. So overall, again, you can see how the building blocks of a nation affect its overall ranking. And we're excited to share some more details with you. Back to you, David.
Well, now it's time to get an overview of the key insights from the 2021 study on a global perspective. And who better to do that for us than Professor David Riepstein from Wharton University. Professor Riepstein has been our partner in this study since it started, and his unique understanding and unique perspective of countries, of brands, and what's driving GDP growth is unrivaled. So let's hear from David now.
Hello, I'm Dave Riepstein. I'm a marketing professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. I've been involved with the Best Country Study since its inception. This year has been a different year. It's been a transformational year. There's been many things that have affected how we view countries and how we live our particular lives. First and foremost, obviously, we've had to deal with the COVID-19 and the tragic loss of millions of lives all around the world. Accompanying this has been the huge impact on economies of various different countries, leading to an overall global recession. Some countries have handled the pandemic well, such as South Korea and Taiwan and several others, whereas other countries have not handled it nearly as well. Accompanying this pandemic has been the subsequent vaccine distribution. And this has required acquisition of vaccines as well as some form of equitable distribution of those. Perhaps Israel has been the country that has done the best at it. There are others that are catching up, but there are other countries that are still struggling today with trying to manage the vaccine distribution. A third major thing that's been happening this year has been the Black Lives movement that originated in the United States and has found it in various other countries all around the world. Climate impact has been a major event that's happened in various different countries. Perhaps most notable are the brush fires that happened in Australia. We've seen other events, such as the explosions that happened in the Beirut port, killing millions of lives. And of course, we could not ignore Brexit and the impact that's had on the British economy, as well as the economies of Europe. Many, many events have made this year an exceptional year. And it's part of what it is that we've all had to adjust to. Perhaps the greatest impact, of course, has been the pandemic. And what we have witnessed as individuals is we see that how we buy and where we shop, that's changed. How we work, many of us working from home, some of us not having jobs. So there's been a dramatic impact for individuals, where we eat, and how we interact with family and friends, dramatically affected, and we've had to adapt. Businesses have had to adapt as well. And what they have had to do is how they connect with their customers has changed. Meetings have changed. The ability to have trade shows dramatically affected. The whole supply chain has been disrupted. And certain industries, such as the hospitality industries or the airline industry, have been dramatically affected, with sporting events being canceled throughout the world. So many industries have suffered as a result. And when I've talked to business leaders, almost inevitably, what it is that they tell me is they've needed to be agile. And it sort of is the buzzword that I hear from companies. But that's not restricted to just individuals and companies. Countries have had to adapt as well. And what it is that we have seen is we see, obviously, trying to get the healthcare systems up to speed and handling with this medical crisis that we've got. And getting medical supplies to the hospitals and to individuals has also been an issue. But trying to cope with the unemployment levels and trying to deal with that and supporting the local governments has been a major issue for countries all around the world. And what countries have had to do they've had to adapt as well. Well, we too at the Best Country Study have had to go through our own adaptations. We've added 13 new attributes that we use for evaluating countries, and we have taken one of the previous dimensions, that of citizenship, and we have morphed it into a dimension that we call social purpose. And what is social purpose? It has many of the dimensions that we had in citizenship, but it also includes dimensions such as human rights and racial equality and social justice and climate concern that have all been attributes that now feed into the social purpose dimension. And we've added a new dimension. And this new dimension, this new overall factor is one of course, agility. And what is it that we have feeding into agility? Our perceptions of countries in terms of their adaptability and in terms of responsiveness and how progressive they are and how modern they happen to be and how dynamic they are, all feed into this agility dimension. So with that said, let's take a look at the latest rankings that we have.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to the final stop on our Best Country tour. We've literally been doing this for 24 hours, a pretty amazing feat. I wanted to give a big shout out to David Roth and the team behind this because, again, 24 hours of around the world talking about the best countries is a pretty amazing feat. Also, our partners at U.S. News and World Report and Wharton School of Business, thank you guys for your collaboration, as always. Pretty amazing. Today, I'm going to talk about Made in America and the power of America as a nation and as a marketer. But before I get into that, I want to hand it over to my friend Jimmy to talk a little bit more about this year's study.
Thank you. I'm Jimmy. I'm the host of the show. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining us here in the United States of America, which is, according to U.S. News and World Report, the number 6 best country in the world. That's right, we're 6th. It's actually not that bad considering we had a violent insurrection to overthrow our own government this year. And the award for number 1 country, the best country in the world, goes to, drumroll, oh, never mind, no drummer. Canada. Canada is number 1. Those mother puckers, they are a country with a moose on its coins is better than us. Japan was number 2, despite being home to a giant radioactive lizard. Germany was 3rd. Switzerland and Australia rounded out the top 5, and then it's us. We actually moved up a spot from number 7 last year, so that's good. You know, if Trump had won, he would have made America 8 again. So anyway, congratulations to our neighbors up north. An apology accepted.
Thank you, Jimmy. It's always great being picked up on late night. It was exciting for us, so lots of fun there. So a little bit more detail on our best country study. We have sampled 17,000 people around the world, 78 nations on 76 country attributes. So it's a massive study. We reduced it down to 10 key rankings that ladder up to what makes a powerful nation. We have 2 new rankings, which I'll talk about. And this is our 6th year running and partnering with U.S. News. So come check us out on U.S. News and World Report or the new app we're about to launch, the Best Country app. In 2020, the U.S. ranked number 7 of all 78 nations out there. So pretty strong ranking on overall strength of a nation. We actually held off this year and fielding the study a little bit longer than normally because we wanted to wait till after the election because we wanted to make sure we got how the world viewed us post the presidential elections because to capture that kind of where it's taking us in 21. We actually are up 1 ranking point since 2020, so that's a positive. You can see that Canada this year is number 1. Way to go, Canada. Followed by Japan and Germany. Germany is a beast. Let's watch them in terms of being a marketing country. They have a lot going for them. Then Switzerland, Australia, then the USA. Let's talk about what goes inside these metrics. So our total ranking is based on a combination of these 10 country metrics from traditional power. So that's money and banks and tanks, as we like to call it. It's the strength and the infrastructure of a country. The power behind that is one dimension. We have agility, which is a new dimension, something that's become more important than ever, particularly during COVID. So nations need to be flexible, and I think we're all being judged on how agile we were over the past year, and because the world has changed and nations have to change with it. Cultural influence is another dimension, and that's we're strong on that because we're the entertainment industry and Hollywood and it's art and music and things. Where do those things come from? So that's cultural influence. Entrepreneurship. So how much does it encourage the pioneering spirit? Heritage is another dimension of a country that's important to reflect, tourism and business and something we measure. Social purpose is a new factor. Of course, we should be measuring that, and we were so excited to add this as a metric that we can look at how countries do on, and it does contribute to the success of a nation, to its GDP, to people wanting to visit a nation. So another really important new factor. Quality of life is something we measure nations on, as well as are they movers? Are they up and coming? Are they kind of disrupting and creating some energy and coming out of left field in terms of a global leader? We measure adventure. And that's probably more tourism focused, but that excitement, that nature, the cities, all those things that are create this kind of allure. And finally, open for business. how easy it is to operate and work with this, taxes, all the structures for a business to succeed. So these are the metrics that we measure every country on, and they ladder up to our overall power ranking. Again, USA now is number 6. When you look at our rankings and where our strengths and weaknesses are, it's a little bit surprising when I first started looking at this data. So we're number 1 on power, number 1 on agility, which is amazing because I'll talk more about that in a minute. Cultural influence, number 3. Number 3 on entrepreneurship. But then it starts to drop. Heritage, we're a fairly young country, maybe not with as much heritage as other markets. Number 16. Surprised a little bit weak on social purpose, on new metric. Quality of life, number 20. So again, a little weaker on some of those fundamentals. 24 on mover. Not a lot of credit for adventure. I'm a snowboarder, so I'm surprised because we have some good mountains out here. And finally, open for business, number 45. So maybe not the easiest market to do business in. And you can see the number 1s and 2s in each of those markets. So Switzerland, easy to do business. Brazil, number 1 on adventure, and so on. So you can start to see and compare who's doing well and where are we lagging. Canada, again, number 1 on social purpose when we're far at 19. So some work to be done there in terms of our reputation. In terms of last year, just to see how we're moving, fairly flat. Agility and social purpose are new metrics, so there's no movement there. We remain number 1 on power. We've gained 1 rank point on cultural influence, up a little bit on heritage, down in quality of life. So that's a big negative there, but everything else was up on mover, a little bit more adventure credit, and neutral and open for business. So again, this is how the world's seeing us. We're fairly strong across the board and dominant on a few things. As I said, agility is something that's becoming more and more important. We've done a lot of work on measuring the agility of brands, and we know that's important today. Agility is something that's even more important for nations, and we're being judged again by how we reacted to COVID, even by how many vaccines have made it out there, and it's affecting how we're being judged, not just us, but all the countries. Agility is something that's really important today, which is why we're measuring it. It actually is the number 1 driver of GDP of all the dimensions we talked about. So that has the highest weighting in the equity and the ranking of a nation. Why is that important? Agile nations, the top agile nations are seen as better places to find jobs, having greater economic influence, seen as more entrepreneurial. So again, there's a lot of power behind an agile nation and something that we have a strength in. So let's take a look at our rankings. The USA ranks number 1 on being agile, followed by Australia, Canada, Germany. Again, Germany's a strong market, as we know, but you can start to see it's always rising to the top. Singapore, South Korea, Japan, and then the Netherlands. So those are the top 8 most agile nations in our study. You can go to find out more on our site, but again, top few. Again, agility is something that's amazing that we own, and I think it's true to who we are as a nation and something we need to take advantage of and continue to take advantage of. But it's not just about being agile as a nation, it's about the brands that come out of our nation. And here are some examples of powerfully agile brands that are US brands from Disney, and just thinking about how they launched Disney Plus during COVID and responded, and now it's a whole new way of launching movies. I mean, there's an agility in how they do their business. Amazon, that's all they've been, is agile, from being a virtual bookstore to being whatever you need it to be now. Google, again, another amazing brand that just infiltrates our lives and makes it easier by being agile and helping us be agile. Everybody likes to talk about Apple. It's not just a cool brand, it's an agile brand. It creates a lifestyle, it creates an environment that you want to engage with. We see some other interesting brand, Make-A-Wish Foundation, which has been doing a lot of collaboration and partnership work, and I think that's interesting. Microsoft, definitely an agile brand and leaning into recent times as well. NASA, how could you be more agile than sending things into space? And Netflix, completely disrupting entertainment, and it did that by being very agile over a 5-year period or a 10-year period, and it just completely flipped how we consume. There's definitely a symbiotic relationship between brands and nations. When you think of Germany, you think of probably Volkswagen and BMW. You think of France, you think of Chanel or Samsung. Again, they're really linked to their nations. We have brands that are very linked to who we are. Think Levi's. And brands are important for business, yes, but they're also important in representing our nations, and vice versa. So here's some research we did as part of the study. 79.5% agree that consumer brands play an important role in defining a country's culture. Right? So we are what we sell, we are what we buy, and the brands have a voice in shaping that. On the flip side, 78.6% agree that the country a product is made in impacts my preference to purchase it. So what does it mean to be made in America? And that means something, right? If we have strong equity. But also the brands that we send out to around the world, they're reflective of who we are as a nation, and they're our biggest billboard, I would say. So we've been spending a lot of time digging into what is being, which countries are stronger and weaker in terms of where things are made. And this is some of our new metrics. It's our made in metric. And what we see, first of all, here's where you start to see Germany shine. Germany is renowned across many sectors. So it ranks #1 in terms of automobiles being made in Germany, healthcare, pharma, technology, beer and spirits. So they have a good time and they have good cars, financial services. Canada and US do pretty well in real estate. US is up there in the top 3 in most of these. Slips down to #4 in healthcare, #5 in packaged goods, foreign beer, not bad, and foreign spirits. So again, you could see nations bring some power to the things they sell. So when you're thinking about fashion, maybe you're thinking about Italy, and maybe those are the most prestigious brands when you want. And that association gives fashion power in Italy. Cosmetics in France, there's an allure to being associated with France when it comes to cosmetics. So again, there's an inextricable link between the countries and the brands that they sell, and there's an opportunity to leverage those things. So and then in the vein of name of late night and top 10 lists and top 5 lists, I did a couple of lists here for you guys. So unfortunately, we can't all shout out what we think, but wondering what you guys think, and you could write it down and email me if you'd like. What are the most loved brands in America today? Because if the brands represent who we are, the brands we love should reflect who we are. Well, here you go. I'll show you. We like M&M's, Reese's, and Hershey's, so Americans love their candy. It was really interesting to see Clorox on there. Maybe there's this love of like this dependability that comes out of it, because similarly with Band-Aid, that comfort, and we love Christmas. So those rank on our love metric. They rank the top 6 brands. The most preferred. This was also interesting. So some of them you would be okay, Facebook, Google. These are great brands. Ziploc's a really powerful brand. One of the most preferred brands. It ranks high on value and worth paying more for. The Postal Service, what a brand. It's like there's only one postal service. But then you get things like Dawn, like, again, detergents, the things that just make your life easier. Those are things that are preferred as well. But there's pricing power in this preference. And you could see I'll choose Ziploc over a store brand any day of the week because it's only an extra 50 cents in a Ziploc, hypothetically. The most innovative brands, most of these are tech brands, but they span from retail like Amazon to NASA. So it's pretty interesting to technology in terms of the most innovative brands out there today. The most trusted, we have Fauci up there, interesting, Rubbermaid. So again, it's about security, but I trust my food. I trust my children with Band-Aids, or, it's interesting. There's a little bit of a battle between the most preferred is USPS, and the most trusted is UPS. So they're both pretty strong brands, wrestling for our hearts, I think. The Coast Guard's doing really well up there. The Navy did pretty well too, by the way, for those of you who work on Navy. The most prestigious brands. I thought this was fascinating because most of them are not American brands. So prestige is happening outside of the brands that we make, at least from Americans. And that's probably not so surprising, but it was interesting to see some of the most prestigious brands. And lastly, the most socially responsible, not a surprise here. Most of these are charitable brands. There are some strong, purposeful, and socially responsible brands out there that didn't make the very top, but are up there. Tom's, Ben & Jerry's, plenty of them. But the top ones are brands like Habitat for Humanity, which is a very strong brand in the marketplace with a lot of momentum. It's a way of giving, which is not just giving. It's in getting involved. Or Doctors Without Borders. It's a proactiveness that makes them so powerful. We have many iconic brands that come out of America that are truly iconic. Amazon, Apple, as I said, Google, Disney. Again, look at some of these brands. These represent who we are. They feel very American to us. If you look at what they stand for very similar things that we do as a nation. Again, really powerful brands. These are really global brands. Many of these brands are retail brands. So they have places you can go and buy and shop. And these are brands that are a chance for us to represent who we are around the world, because there's a Starbucks in most countries by now, in most cities, and while Starbucks is American, it's also the world's brands. And so we're out there, and these brands represent who we are. And they're doing a really good job of representing who we are. Here's an example of Amazon's equity around the world, and you could see that its equity, it goes far beyond our borders, right? It's an American brand that's become a global brand, and there's an association with America that it empowers, and vice versa. And then we need to create some symbioticness there and take advantage of that. So rather than me talk about retail, I'm going to hand it over to Beth Ann, who can do probably a much better job than I do as CEO of VMwire Commerce. So Beth, on to you.
Thank you, Michael. My pleasure. And you teed it up beautifully, because as we go into the story of retailer brands, you have to start with some imagery, right? And usually when you start thinking about your past retail experiences and Americana, great brands that we all know, and no matter where we are in the world, the first image that comes to mind is, well, for me, this is where I started my very first career at the age of 15 as someone working at the Gap. This is the Gap of years gone by, and hopefully is a bit of conjuring up of some nostalgia. And you think about kind of that heyday of shopping, where it was all about, in America, it was about the shopping mall, right? That was the place where there was the Orange Julius, and there was the Wetzel's pretzels or Annie's pretzels and cookies, and that's where you met your friends. Well, actually, those images traveled around the world, and not only did that footprint of the mall become a global entity and a place where everybody was shopping, but so did many of our brands travel within that infrastructure. So you had the Sears, you had sometimes JCPenney, you had many long-standing American brands that came to life as anchors in these robust meeting and retail spaces around the world. Well, hopefully that isn't your image of the golden age of commerce. And we'd like to think right now, based on all the research that we sit on top of, that we're in this new kind of seminal seismic moment when it comes to commerce. And it's really being created by, like you mentioned, a whole new set of attributes and sort of fundamental pillars that make these new brands travel the way they do, live the way they do within our own walls of this country, but also represent what they do globally. So this is a great example when you start with Apple, and you can't really talk great, physical retail and e-commerce retail without thinking about a brand like Apple, one that is literally everywhere around the world. But what's very interesting about how they've selected the way they've come to life, both physically and digitally, is really been about how do they take these iconic landmark spaces and make them very localized for the community, from the user-generated content that's on the walls, to the imagery that they surround you with, to the actual iconic landmark buildings that they chose. It's almost like a scenic tour that you would want to visit no matter where you went around the world. Where is that Apple store? And you kind of want to go into it, even though the products for the most part are always the same. And there's usually some bit of a consistent experience, right down to the sessions that they hold. But the people that are giving those sessions are, again, incredibly localized, relevant to a community, and feel like an extension of what you'd expect in that country. So a great American brand, but recognizing that agility has to be a part of the future. Nike never lets us down, right? There isn't a young person in this world that doesn't have something Nike. And it's still one of those brands that everybody covets and wants to be a part of from a retail experience standpoint. But they take retail experience to new heights and new levels now. This is an example of Nike in Brazil, where they took the street graffiti artist concept and they made it actually a sneaker drop and a chance to buy that sneaker directly from the graffiti. So it was an incredible creative story of how retail now can be anything and anywhere. But again, where a brand like Nike recognizes that while you might be chasing American culture when you think about the Nike brand, you also are now thinking about it in much more locally relevant, culturally relevant ways, depending upon where they are around the world. And so not everybody is trying to wear a piece of Americana anymore. Nike can be much more of a global citizen around the world. Starbucks is the next great example. Starbucks, again, Seattle roots, great American brand, but you almost wouldn't remember that it's American anymore, depending upon where you live around the world and your Starbucks experience. Sure, when Americans travel, do they still seek out a Starbucks experience? They do. But what do they find when they get there? They find local flavors, a local sensorial experience, technology oftentimes that pulls in local technology companies. The technology in this example, which is in Shanghai, comes from an Alibaba partnership. So there's a lot of experimenting and partnerships and alliances that are being made by Starbucks in the local communities that they're a part of, and certainly right down to the recipes, the beverages, and the foods that they supply. So when you seek out a Starbucks experience around the world, you're no longer doing it to get a carbon copy exact menu of what you would have from your hometown. You're actually using it as your gateway into discovering the local nuances and differences around the world. Again, it takes agility and it takes cultural relevance and entrepreneurship to be able to do this really well. So a whole new set of principles that are allowing this kind of retail to really sizzle and snap in local markets, and then still allow American brands to travel in ways that are effective. This last example gets us into a different category as we think about auto. And, you talked a lot, Michael, about sort of that importance of, the auto manufacturer around the world. And Ford, continues to be a really strong one in terms of an American brand. But they're also looking at the disruptor in the space, which is Tesla, and thinking about, how does like a Mackie and some of their newer models come to life in ways that are way more relevant to the consumer they're trying to serve, whether that be in America or in other places that have very different kinds of dealer models and buying models for cars. So they're really experimenting with how do they put the car out there for test drives, test and learns, pilots, and thinking about the entire buying experience and buying process very differently than they ever did before. It's tough for a big automobile manufacturer to really think about disrupting their own business model, but there's so much pressure now from some of these other younger companies that are coming in with brand new ways of routes to market, like Tesla has. And so it's really exciting to see how a stalwart company that's been a great American brand can come to life again, really relevantly in individual markets, bend and shape their model to meet the local dealer, the local market, restrictions, regulations, but still do things with the consumer experience at the heart and the way the consumers want to engage in order to go into buying and owning a car today. And the story wouldn't be complete, of course, without Amazon. And what is, again, very cool about this now ubiquitous retailer almost around the world is that they also have discovered that it is critically important to meet the consumer wherever they are. So their limits are not just online. They have so much revenue coming in and they have so much value creation by serving the consumer online, having so much data on the consumer that you think that they would stop there. But no, they've actually recognized that, there is real value to the physical retail experience. It might be touchless. It might know you and anticipate your needs in ways that no other retail experience can and will. But their ability to get data in near real time and then have a physical world, including Whole Foods as part of that ecosystem that allows them to be the dominant player that they are right now in your life from a retail standpoint and to serve your every need across the entire way that you could possibly think about shopping and buying. Amazon is there to meet those needs. So don't be surprised when you continue to see 5-star stores, Go stores, and other subsets of the Amazon brand both come to life in the American universe, but certainly on a global stage as well. And they're constantly learning and iterating and, again, using that formula of agility and cultural relevance and consumer centricity to serve in new ways. So when we kind of think about what's next and what's on the horizon, I mean, all the brands I think that we just talked about aren't going anywhere. We're going to continue to see them redefine and reimagine the commerce space. But there are also a few that I'd like to tee up, and many are clients that we work with, so we're close to their strategies and thinking about how they're thinking about the future. So the first one in the fast casual dine space. The number one for years and years has been McDonald's, and McDonald's footprint globally was always like lift and shift. and you went to a local market expecting everything to taste and look and smell exactly the same that it did wherever your home market was, and especially if it was the United States. Well, Wendy's is the next brand now taking the number 2 spot, and again, recognizing the power in a global consumer and a global audience, and knowing that when people travel too, they like to be able to see that thing that's that space and restaurant that they can identify with that serves their needs, even if the menu does have slight nuances and differences by the location. The next example is Coca-Cola. Again, a company that is restructuring and constantly thinking about how do we meet the future consumer. And for them, that usually does mean a next generation consumer. How are we still relevant to the youngest consumers that we can serve? And one of the ways they did this recently was through the Freestyle machine. Again, adapting that machine for local markets, making it sure that it was bringing in flavors and profiles in ways that made the consumer actually feel like the creator. So it was no longer about the Coca-Cola recipe. It was about your individual personalization and ability to have your own recipe. So they're going to continue to think about their vending, their machines, their locations, where do they disrupt on the street, and places where they can bring their product closer to you and allow you to have more power in creating the recipe and the cocktail that meets your desire for the beverage. The next example is maybe a bit unexpected when we think about consumer packaged goods. I know you had Ziploc there, and this is another great brand from SC Johnson. Again, already a global company that's always recognized that it has been about really understanding hyper-local insight for the consumer. And that goes down to the format, the pack size, the packaging, understanding sustainability, and also recognizing that their brands, to your point before, how do you put equity into a brand? There is a premiumization even in these categories that can occur when people trust you, when you can show that you get them, that you're not forcing them to buy something in a huge size if that's not the quantity that they need. So how do you serve the consumer exactly as they need you, given their various lifestyles? So there could be someone that's a more value customer that's willing to buy their product because the Raid comes in a small pack and is what they need for a daily dose of what they need to deal with in their own sort of home environment. So I'll always love to watch what SC Johnson is doing and how they continue to strengthen their brands around the world. And I just want to end on this last point, which is Scott Galloway. Many of you may follow. If you don't, you should look him up, both in terms of podcasts and some of his vlogs. He is an behavioral economics professor. He teaches for NYU. He's had a number of startups himself, so he's a serial entrepreneur. And he just came out with Post-Corona, and it's just an incredible, insightful book that has just, was spun out very quickly during the crisis to help people make sense of what was happening in the world. And a few points that I want to just leave you with, as it sums up a lot of what Michael and I were talking about in this section, is this concept of agility. One of the things that we've discovered in talking to clients about this was it was really abstract and it was always in concept. And one of the things that COVID did for companies is it forced them into rethinking practices, needing to move really quickly, rethinking their squads or their pods or the way that their teams came together, oftentimes in a remote work environment. And so what we need to do now is really codify a lot of those learnings and discoveries that came through this time to continue to operate and build our brands in new ways. And one of the discoveries that came from this for many brands that really allowed themselves to be much more spontaneous, much faster at bringing things to market, was that actually the consumer loved it. The consumer responded very strongly. They were okay if the website or the e-commerce site wasn't perfect. They were okay to have a different kind of dialogue with the brand, to hear the brand show a bit more of a human side, a side that was sometimes more vulnerable, certainly very imperfect. And I think a lot of companies have been striving for, very rigid processes that allowed for perfection and quality at a certain level all the time. And in actuality, what consumers are looking for now is actually more humanness and humanity from brands. So I think this idea of agility kind of really does, I think, free up the future brands to meet the consumer faster, at a different pace, with more experimentation, and in ways that allow the consumer themselves to have a bit more of themselves in the experience, to see that they are, being spoken to in much more personalized, customized, but faster ways that meet their lives. So with that, back over to you, Michael.
Great. Thank you. That was amazing. And there were so many things that struck a chord with me, including how I used to go places when I was traveling, and I would see a retail outlet that was the same as my local neighborhood. And I was depressed a little bit because it was like, oh my God, I went all the way across the country and it feels like I'm back home. And so it's great to see how these retailers are localizing and making them special, because otherwise it's all cookie cutter. Really interesting. We also, to your point about being humanistic and whatnot, in BAV, we show that authenticity is so fundamental to brands. And so you have to be authentic and real, and it's okay to make mistakes as long as it's real. So a few key takeaways. First of all, America remains a powerhouse in terms of its country's top 7 out of 78, pretty impressive. It owns some amazing dimensions, and there's, and I think agility is the new superpower. A little upsetting that we're a bit under on purposefulness, something that would be great if we can kind of move up in the ranks. So it's up to all of us. Adventure is surprisingly under leveraged, and I think it's just people don't know how amazing this country is and how diverse it is in terms of the geography and what it can, what it's all about. So it's a hidden power in the USA. U.S. brands are fundamental to who we are globally. It's always been Hollywood, which is a brand in a sense. It's been the products that come out of our country. They reflect who we are. So I think in many ways we are the voice of a nation, guys. So if we want to talk about our purpose maybe is to elevate the U.S. through the work we do, because again, America is reflective of the brands that we create.
And then just the final two on the retailers front, to the point about the sort of chain store approach, which is what came to my mind when you were saying that, Michael. It doesn't have to be cookie cutter. It doesn't have to be a lift and shift for people to feel that connection to the brand, to even take the cultural nuance that comes out of movies and TVs and music and say, oh, I love that brand. I want to go check it out. And that brings me to that final point in terms of, operating globally but acting locally. It's very important for success to be able to pull in a tourist, and we will be traveling again very soon. So the best way of pulling in a tourist is by having that local discovery, even if it's a brand that we recognize. So being able to pull people into, I trust them, so I want to actually see their interpretation of the right flavors, the right adaptations and design nuance that really reflects the local market. So, continue to think about that as you work with these types of brands.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Beth Ann, and thank you, David Roth, and everybody that made this amazing 24 hours possible. Please go and check out the Best Country app. You'll be able to download it, and you'll be able to look at every detail about brand USA or any other country. It's quite amazing, and you can go in there and search any country and find out where they rank on which things. There's articles from U.S. News. There's things that we've done. There's videos of our partners at Warden. So take a look. It's a really cool thing. All right. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you all very much indeed. To celebrate this very special launch, we've created a very special app. It's a virtual reality experience where you can literally visit every single country that's featured in the 2021 study. Well, you can get it on your desktop, your laptop, your tablet, your mobile phone. All you need to do is just download it from the URL that's on the screen here. Enjoy, explore. It's full of interest and insights, and we'll be refreshing the content frequently over the course of the next few months. So please do go back frequently. Earlier, I talked about the significance of countries being seen as brands. This is being increasingly realised right across the world, not just by business leaders, but by governments at the most senior of levels. I caught up with the Prime Minister of the Netherlands and asked him how important he believes country brands are. Mr. Prime Minister, what contribution do you think that retailing makes to the economy and society in general?
So many. I mean, it is the biggest employer in the Netherlands. 900,000 people are somehow connected to the retail sector, so it is huge in its economic impact. That means that many people, in many cases young people, start their working life experiences in the retail sector. It is also a place where you can learn how to be more entrepreneurial and how to start your own business. It is a sector in our economy which is very much focused on innovation and disruptive innovation. It is very much connected to the modern economy, to the internet, to online shopping. So there are so many positives. And it's also a place where people come together. It's also a sort of community place. In some of the stores, people drink a cup of coffee, meet friends, and then buy some stuff. So it has many, many impacts on society.
Mr. Prime Minister, you had a fantastic career at Unilever. You obviously know brands very well. Do you think country brands are as important as product brands?
Oh, they're crucial. And what I found in this job is that the brand of Amsterdam, the brand of the Netherlands, the brand of Eindhoven, or the whole commercial area around cities like Zwolle and Amersfoort are crucial for our international standing. And the fact that you can bike to school as a child, that it's relatively safe here, that there are so many possibilities when you like sports or culture. And I really learned to brand that much more than we did already.
One last question, Mr. Prime Minister. What advice would you give retailers today who are under a lot of pressure, under a lot of stress? Everything's changing very fast.
Yeah, but still, at the same time, you are in a fascinating sector. So enjoy what you are doing. We live only once. This is the real thing. This is not the. So you have to make the best of it. And there are so many opportunities for good salespeople, for good businessmen and women, to make use of all those opportunities which are out there. And do realize that you play a very important part in societies. You are really part of society.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow, I can't believe it. We've come to the end of our broadcast. We're almost out of time. I'd like to thank everybody who participated in today's broadcast. And just to remind you again, please do download the app and enjoy going virtually into every single one of our countries in this year's 2021 Best Countries Study. So from me, David Roth, thank you very much indeed. And Mike, thank you very much indeed as well.
My pleasure. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.
Well, have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We really appreciate it.